Can I ask you something that puzzled me for years? Have you ever finished what felt like a brilliant coaching session, right? The client opened up, they reflected deeply, they connected dots that they'd never ever seen before, right? There were tears, there was clarity, maybe even relief. And then right at the end of the session, they looked completely and utterly exhausted. Or perhaps they emailed later saying, I don't know why, but I was completely wiped out afterwards. Or they cancelled the following week's or month's session because they needed to rest. Now, as coaches, we are often taught to think that exhaustion was a brilliant breakthrough, right? And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's something completely different. And today in this video, I want to explore why some clients leave coaching feeling energized, while others leave feeling completely and utterly overwhelmed. Because if you're coaching people experiencing burnout, understanding this one difference could completely change how you work. Now, if we've never met before, I'm Kelly Swingler. I'm the burnoutologist, and over the last 12 years, I've been researching burnout, coaching hundreds of people through it, over 700, and developing burnoutology, a way of understanding burnout that brings together neuroscience, the nervous system, psychology, physiology, and coaching practice. Now, one of the biggest shifts that I've made as a coach isn't asking better questions. It's paying much closer attention to what happens after the coaching session. And we all know, really, right? It's after the coaching session where the magic happens. Now, I remember a client who used to apologise at the end of almost every session. Right? She'd say, I'm so sorry, I'm just absolutely exhausted. And at first I did what many of us would do, right? I took it as a compliment. And I took it as a compliment because I assumed that we'd done some really great work. It had been emotional, that she'd processed a lot. And of course she'd feel tired after an amazing coaching session, right? Except the pattern kept repeating every single session. And eventually I became curious, not so much about the coaching, but about the exhaustion. And I asked her, what does the rest of your day usually look like after we finished, right? And she laughed. But she didn't laugh because it was funny, but because she'd never really thought about it. And she said, well, I usually go back to my laptop and maybe I stare at the screen for half an hour. Then I'll make a cup of tea. And then I wonder why I can't think straight for the rest of the day. And that was the moment that I realised something. I realised that I wasn't just seeing the emotional processing. I was seeing a person with a nervous system that had finally stopped. And when it stopped, the exhaustion she'd been holding back all week or all month finally caught up with her. And I think this is something that many coaches miss, right? And it's not because we're bad coaches, but it's because we've never been taught to look for it. So let's think about the clients that we often work with. Right? They're high achievers, leaders, business owners, founders, parents, professionals, people who spend their entire day doing, responding, managing, right? They're holding everything together. And their nervous system becomes incredibly good, excellent even, at staying in motion. And sometimes because they have to, sometimes because slowing down doesn't feel safe anymore. So they arrive at coaching for perhaps the first hour or two or month, and someone asks about them. You ask about them. And they are invited for the duration of that session to stop solving everyone else's problems. They are invited to notice themselves, to feel, to reflect, to pause. Now that sounds restorative, doesn't it, right? And it's probably something that we're marketing. And it is restorative sometimes, but sometimes that stopping reveals just how exhausted they've become. And I lived like this for years before my first burnout, right? And as a result of that, I completely stopped stopping. Because at the weekend, if I stopped, I'd become exhausted or I'd become ill. So I stopped stopping at the weekend. When I took a holiday, a vacation, spending time with my sons, if I stopped and had a day by the pool, I'd become exhausted. I would become ill. So I stopped stopping on vacation. And then at Christmas, if I stopped, once I'd hosted all the Christmas for everybody, and 27th of December every single year, I would stop and I would become ill or I would feel really exhausted. So I stopped stopping. And for some of your clients, they're doing exactly the same thing, because if the coaching is seemingly the thing that's exhausting them, what do we stop? They're not stopping all of the doing, but they might stop the coaching, because it feels like the coaching is what's leaving them more exhausted. And the more exhausted they become as a result of the coaching, they don't have the energy to do all of the rest of the doing. So here's something I would love for you to consider, right? Because we often think people become tired because they've been really busy. But that's only one type of tiredness, right? Thinking is tiring. Reflecting is tiring. Making decisions is tiring. Talking about difficult experiences is tiring. Even being asked, what do you need, can be exhausting when your brain has spent months asking, what does everyone else need from me? And so for someone approaching burnout, the coaching session may be the most cognitively demanding thing that they have done all month. And not because your coaching is wrong, but because you've asked their brain to do something that it hasn't had the capacity to do for a very long time. Now, let's come back to the nervous system here, shall we? When we're living in prolonged stress, our sympathetic nervous system helps us mobilize, right? Keep going, keep doing, keep producing, keep moving, keep surviving. And many clients become incredibly good at functioning from that place, but they don't necessarily feel calm. They do, though, feel familiar. Movement becomes the strategy. Doing becomes the strategy. Achievement becomes the strategy. And then they walk into your coaching session and suddenly everything slows down. And for the first time, they notice the tension in their shoulders. Maybe they notice the headache. Maybe they notice the shallow breathing, the heaviness, the tears, the emptiness, the space. And nothing new has happened. They've simply become aware of what was already there, right? Already in here. So imagine carrying a heavy backpack all day, right? You barely notice the weight of it while you're walking. We've all done that, right? But the moment you stop, you suddenly realise how heavy it really is. And burnout can feel exactly like that. So the coaching session didn't create the exhaustion, but it's highly likely that it revealed it. Now, this completely changed how I end coaching sessions, right? I used to finish with, so what are your actions for this week? Right? Tell me what you're going to do. Tell me when you're going to do it by. But now I'm much more interested in asking, like, what do you need in the next hour? What do you need for the rest of today? How are you leaving this session? What support do you have after we've finished? What space do you have after we've finished? What might your nervous system need before you jump back into the rest of your day? And those questions tell me far more than another action plan. Because coaching doesn't end when the session ends. Sometimes that's exactly where the work begins. Ultimately, that's the magic of coaching. So the next time a client finishes a session looking drained, instead of assuming that you've gone too deep or that it was an amazing session, ask yourself these 3 questions. Right, firstly, are they emotionally exhausted or neurologically depleted? Because those aren't the same thing. Secondly, did today's session reveal their burnout or cause their tiredness? Because very often, again, it reveals what's already there. And thirdly, what happens to my client after they leave me? I think we need to be aware of this as coaches, right? What happens to my client after they leave me? Do they walk into another 6 meetings? Do they go and collect the kids from school? Do they drive for 3 hours? Do they have 10 minutes to recover? Do they have no space or time at all? Right, context matters, and it matters far more than we sometimes or very often realise. Now, one of the reasons I created my burnout assessment for coaches is because these patterns are often incredibly subtle, right? Clients usually don't arrive in a session saying, I think I'm burning out, right? They tell us they're tired. They tell us that they've lost confidence. They tell us that they can't think clearly, or that they're overwhelmed or struggling. Maybe they tell us that they're forgetting things, or they're snapping at people. They're questioning themselves. And unless we're trained to join those dots, it's easy to coach the symptoms instead of recognizing the pattern underneath them. So if you're interested, it'll take you less than 3 minutes. I'll pop the link for the assessment below. It's designed to help coaches like you start seeing things differently. Now, if there's one thing I'd love for you to remember from this video, it's this. Not every exhausted client leaves coaching because the session was too much. Sometimes they leave exhausted because for the first time all week or all month, they stopped surviving long enough to feel what that survival mode had been costing them. That is a very different conversation, and once you start noticing it, you'll never coach quite the same way again. Now, I'd love to know in the comments, so please do drop them below. Have you ever had a client leave a session looking more tired than when they arrived? Right? What did you make of it at the time? Because the better we understand burnout, the better coaches will become. Not just for clients experiencing burnout, but for all of our clients, regardless of how they come into session. When we start focusing on state and safety, that's the transformation that our clients need. If you found this video useful, I would love for you to give it a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.